Here's another rant. My rant today is about something I saw on Twitter. It was by Michael Hobbes. He's starting to get on my nerves. I agree with him that, you know, some of his liberal thinking, some of his stuff I'm not too keen on. One of the things I'm not too keen on, let me adjust his style, is his lack of people taking personal responsibility for their actions. Now, this is not, a lot of Republicans will say this is a Democrat thing. Republicans do it too. They just do it just for the rich, the privileged. They want it when it benefits them. They want the welfare, they want the tax cuts, they want everything for them, the better roads, the better schools, the better libraries. They just don't want it for the poor people. So, you know, the drug, you know, getting off on drug charges, getting off on rape, getting off on murder, they want all that for them. They don't want it for the poor people. They don't want it for the people of color. And they want police protection only when they're not the ones that are going to go to jail. So, you know, it's both, you know, bailing CEOs out from their bad moves and embezzlements. They want that. They want protection. When we had this recession starting 2001, everybody thinks it's 2008, but that's because of 2008 it was hitting the rich people. It was hitting the poor people in 2001. But that was because of in Michigan it was. But that was because, okay, I'm going off on a tangent there. Anyways, so personal responsibility is left out of Michael Hobbes' dialect, I guess you'd say. But one of the things that he's doing, and it wasn't just Michael Hobbes, it was somebody else who follows Michael Hobbes. I think it's like either a Michael Hobbes crony or it might be Michael Hobbes himself with a secondary Twitter account promoting his own stuff, which, you know, I don't really have a problem with that. So this one person retweeted something about Michael Hobbes writing, and it was about a survey or study, I should say. I get them two words confused, study and survey. I use them interchangeably when I shouldn't. Well, it was about homeless people and the causes of homelessness. And of course, we're going right to the source, which is professionals. Are you already seeing the problem there? High paid, white collar, predominantly white male professionals. Well paid, car, house, job security, probably health insurance, telling us about the reasons for homelessness. So the end result really doesn't matter. They were saying it wasn't just housing costs, or it wasn't, I can't remember what it said, you know, oh no, it's not just, you know, their argument was Hobbes and this other white dude's conclusion was it wasn't just the lack of housing, it's the price of housing. Okay, first thing, why are you going to professionals who are predominantly white, who are predominantly male, who are predominantly secure in their job and their settings, and they've never been homeless, and they probably never will be homeless or even housing insecure? Why are you going to them for this? Your surveys tell you nothing. Okay, first thing, it's all subjective. What are they considering homeless? Because I assure you, if you ask a non-homeless person, someone who's never been homeless, probably never will be homeless, what the word homeless means, you'll get a different answer, a slightly different answer than an actual homeless person. For most homeless people, if you have a roof over your head, you're not homeless. Okay, I used to be homeless. I know how this is. If I knew somebody who couch hopped, flop housed, there was a few different terms. I'd have to think about it for a while to know all the terms. But if they had places to go and people would welcome them in, that wasn't homeless. If you were somebody who, for whatever reason, maybe mental health reasons, maybe needing help with care, maybe you couldn't pay your rent anymore or your mortgage anymore and you had to move in with relatives, but your relatives took you in, you were not homeless. I've heard privileged people call that homeless, and I'm like, they are not homeless. One person, privileged white male, that obviously privileged because he considered himself living out of his car simply because he was staying with me, and his clothes, a lot of his clothes were in her car. Not all the clothes were in his car. Some of his clothes was at my house. Some of his clothes was at his stable residence. He had a stable residence. He was renting a room from somebody, but it was a bit of a drive, and because I was closer to his work by like half an hour driving time, he decided to stay with me. Now, some of his clothes, sometimes he would go back to his stable residence, pick up some of his clothes or toiletries or whatever, put them in his vehicle, and sometimes they would end up in my apartment. Now, this is a different story altogether. It's an interesting story. I did not want him in my apartment. But anyways, he called that he was living out of his car. You're not living out of your car. You have a place to stay. Actually, you have two places to stay. One welcoming, one unwelcoming. And, you got a stable. There's nothing. He was not even housing insecure, but he was calling himself, a couple of times I heard him say he was homeless. Lord knows how many times he told people he was homeless when I didn't hear him. But twice in my presence he said he was homeless, but he usually said he was living out of his truck. He had a truck, not a car. He was living out of his truck, which that was not true. He was bathing at my house. He was sleeping at my house. He was eating at my house. His landing base was my house. And if it was not my house, then it would have been his other residence where he was paying a monthly or a weekly, I don't know, maybe he paid monthly, maybe he paid weekly, to rent a room. And he had full access to all utilities, washing machine, shower, restroom, whatever, kitchen. He just chose to stay with me. So this is what I'm saying. So what do you count as homeless? Okay, and how are you coming up with your findings? All these variables. How are you coming up, how are you determining, why are you doing this? And where are you getting your numbers? I'm sure you didn't go to Skid Row to get your numbers for how many homeless people there are. I'm sure you didn't go to the tent city in Adrian to find out, to count how many homeless are there. What they're talking about, and Flying Spaghetti Monster, forgive me for saying this, they're talking, their findings about low rent and affordable housing and enough housing. That's for the privileged homeless. Flying Spaghetti Monster, forgive me. I never thought I'd say the upper class homeless. I never thought, because homeless is homeless. But what they're talking about, they must have seen some documentary on YouTube, because I've seen a documentary or two of people who are homeless, but it's because where they live, where they work, the area where they work is way too expensive for them to afford to pay a mortgage or rent. So they live in their cars. They're the employed homeless. I can't remember, they have a term, they have a few terms for it. They're employed, have decent jobs, have stable jobs, even some even have health care, 401k, profit sharing, all that stuff. But if they were to, they would have to drive like 2 hours one way to get to and from work if they were to find some place that affordable, right? So they just live in their vehicles. And they somehow do it. That's the people, that's the upper class homeless, okay? And really, to be honest, a lot of homeless people would say that's not homelessness because they have a vehicle. And plus they have a job, a stable, decent job that they're not, they don't have to worry about, losing simply because of homelessness. And a lot of these places, there's a lot of people who also, where they're working, if that's the case, where they're working are also homeless. So I mean, the company couldn't fire all these people because they're all, they wouldn't be able to get anybody to replace them. They wouldn't be able to keep anybody on staff because they'd have to fire them because they're homeless, because they're just not paying enough for people to be able to afford rent. There's a lot of people, quote unquote homeless, living in their vehicles in New York City, because the cost of living is so expensive. But they will have jobs there, so they just bite the bullet, live out of their vehicles, and bistro or wait tables or do whatever, work in the bookstore, whatever, but live in their vehicles because that job doesn't pay enough for them to afford rent. And they couldn't make it if they went out far enough from the city to find someplace affordable. And some of these places, they just don't pay enough for you to afford rent anywhere. Like back in the 80s, you could get a job at McDonald's. I don't know what the pay was, $5.50 an hour, but in no way, even if you worked full time, could you be able to afford even an apartment, even in a really cruddy place, because you just there's no rent that low, or even a room, for that pay you couldn't even afford a room. Ask me how I know this. I've been through this before. But anyways, why are these people not talking to homeless people? Okay, because I can tell you the number one reason people are homeless. Okay, most people who are homeless are not living in their car. They are on the street. They are actually homeless in anybody's dialect, whether it be homeless people's dialect or privileged white male people's dialect. They're homeless on the street, and the reason is because for them people, which is the majority of homeless people, the overwhelming majority of homeless people, it's because they have not had the opportunity to be able to save up enough money so that if something happens, they can ride that through to the next time where they're stable. Okay, they don't have the bankroll. They don't have the family ties or the what would you call it? A relative support system, a friend support system. They don't have that all together to where they can survive that temporary setback till they get back on their feet. So they end up homeless. Now, a lot of people, it might be because they come from poor communities where their friends, they might have a lot of friends, but their friends are barely hanging on themselves, and taking another person in would put them out, put them homeless. Or they might be living in an apartment complex, or renting a house or townhouse, whatever, and they're not allowed to have, their agreement with the landlord might be they can't have more people in the house. It's not signed in on the rental agreement, and to sign somebody up on, maybe they can only limit the household to so many adults, or maybe it would cost more for them, if they renegotiated the rental contract to include another person on the, in the living quarters. It might be something like that. So the people end up homeless. And the biggest issue with homeless people who become homeless after having a place is mental health issues. And it's because like maybe they had to take some time off of work to get help, maybe inpatient, outpatient help, or maybe, you know, maybe if they had enough days off, they could have simply taken some days off. Of course, they'd need enough pay for that to tide them over with that lack of income for a few days off for self-care, so they can get themselves back into a better place, get themselves some sleep if they weren't sleeping, whatever, see a doctor, whatever, then go back to work. But that bankroll needs to be there. And they have to have a good enough job to where the job will allow them time off to self-care, whether that be, you know, seeing a mental health doctor, seeing a medical doctor, seeing, being an inpatient, just even getting enough sleep. Like a lot of people with mental health disorders suffer from insomnia, and it might just get to them. And you know, the cascading effect, the snowball effect of not getting enough sleep, especially when somebody already has a pre-existing mental health disorder. It can cause hallucinations, it could cause drastic mood swings, it can cause a lot of problems that will put somebody at risk of losing their job or their home. Now, if you don't have that bankroll to carry you over, you're going to lose everything and become homeless. And you'll probably end up losing your job once you become homeless. Because of the stink fact, not being able to wash yourself, not being able to change your clothes, not being able to eat properly, not being able to get enough sleep, not being able to get to and from work. So that is the biggest thing. Most people, that's how it was for me. I became instantly homeless at 17. I had no bankroll. I had not even a social security card. I didn't have a birth certificate. I didn't even know my social security number, so I could not get ID. Plus I was 17, which limited my work. I think even back then, it was in the early 90s, late 80s, up until the age of 21, you were still limited on how much an employer could legally employ you, how many hours per week. So